Hi there, and thanks for clicking on my video. This video is going to be about a pop-up camper built for my truck about 3 or 4 years ago to accommodate my living situation. I was spending my summers in southeast Alaska and my winters in the interior Fairbanks, Alaska. Before we get started, here's a little sneak peek at the inside of this camper once it was finished. This all started with this picture. It's kind of my brain throwing up on paper on what I was going to do, and it came out pretty close to what I figured. I was tired of bumming around and sleeping out of my truck when I was traveling from the southeast back into the interior or even down south back to Montana and such. And I just wanted a place where I could always sleep and didn't want to tow a trailer around. I used to do metal fabrication as a profession and just so happened to have a bunch of metal tools left over from that. They're stuffed in a friend's place down south, so I ran down there after the summer season to build this. The frame of the camper is made of 1-inch square tube and just mild steel. Here you see the sliders for the pop-up mechanism. They were just polyurethane blocks I cut on a table saw with aluminum rails, and that was, I think, a 1.5-inch inside, so 2-inch outside channel iron. Now, by this time, I've been mulling over this whole camper idea in my head for about 3 months, and I was pretty tickled to get going on it. The way I ended up going was with the 3-wall design. The outside of it's just a camper you'd find on a construction utility truck or something like that, which I like because it's kind of low-key. You don't really think it's a camper at first glance. Then there's the base wall, which is attached to the floor, and then there's one wall that floats between the two. Now, it took quite a bit of doing to figure out the best way to get this thing to go up and down. From chains to screw actuators to hydraulics, I just ended up going with a cable system. It seemed like the cheapest and the best way to go. And even that took a bit of doing to figure out just right. Now this is what I ended up doing with that system. The winch is to the left right by the door. The cable goes under the floor to a trolley and a bridge system that has cables that run to the front of the camper and back to the back of the camper. They go up over these stays and they lift up on the outer wall. As the outer wall went up, it lifted the third center wall up with it. Now once I got the frame painted, I screwed down 1/2-inch plywood and insulated the underside with about 2 inches of rigid foam. You'll notice that center section's missing, and that's so that you can lift the floor up and get to the cable system. Now we're moving on to getting the skin of the walls on the camper. This little box and pan brake I built years ago sure did come in handy for this. I want to say this aluminum was about 18 or 20 gauge. Once I got the base and the intermediate walls skinned, I was able to put the whole thing back together. And this is just left the last wall to be skinned. Now this is the first time I popped the camper up. Kind of fun to see your little brainchild actually come to be something. Now it's time to start painting this thing. I hit the whole thing with the DA with 120 grit and painted it with an industrial acrylic enamel. Once that was done, it was time to work on the interior. That too I insulated with rigid foam. In most places is 1 inch, on some places it could only be 3/4 of an inch. I want to say the coldest I was in with it was about 0 degrees Fahrenheit up in the Yukon, and even my little Coleman 2-burner stove in about 5 minutes heated this thing right up. It's still pretty cold down on the floor, but it did pretty good. Something I did different on my next camper was install a Chinese D4 heater off eBay. It's about $200. Runs off 12 volts and diesel fuel and really heats a place. I started skirting the inside walls with 1/4-inch veneer plywood. Now this stuff isn't top of the line, but with a little bit of stain on it, it really perks up and looks pretty good. And then I just dressed everything else up with some pine fern strips from the Home Depot that I cleaned up with a belt sander. Now we're getting into building the doors. I kind of have fun with stuff like this because I get to mix carpentry and metalwork. The door frames are made out of 2-inch aluminum channel iron with cabinet-grade plywood inside for bracing, and again insulated with rigid foam. Now for the exterior of the door, I use a product called FRP. It's fiberglass reinforced plastic. It's kind of cool stuff. A lot of times you'll find it in industrial settings and bathrooms and some kitchens. And the interior is that 1/4-inch laminated veneer plywood. Now, I did have some worries about the door fitting all the time and closing square with the camper going up and down and staying square and flexing, but it worked out pretty good. I think everything was rigid enough with the 2-inch channel iron floor and all the structural integrity of that pretty stout wall guide system. Now for about $30 I picked up a couple of door latches for an RV door off of eBay. They worked out pretty great. They're made for a material that's about 1.25 inches, so they fit my doors just right. Now we're getting into putting the interior together, and this is when I really start rushing things because I wanted to beat the first snow up north when I was driving back up. But this part of the build was really kind of fun. I enjoy doing this kind of thing, building the cabinet and using a pocket joiner. It sure can be fun to take the time to build something half right like this, even though it was a rushed and simple job. Now again, everything's just inexpensive 1x pine material from the Home Depot and inexpensive 1/4-inch veneer plywood. Now I think most of the rest of these pictures are about the time I sold the camper. And of course you can see the inside I dressed up with a couple of little cabinets for cooking utensils and got the bed all put together. Now the bed kind of slides out so that you can sleep on it. There's only about 7 or 8 inches of room to walk in, so it was pretty tight. And if company was over, I suppose you could just sleep on the floor and put the couch up back like the couch they sleep on there. Of course here you see where the winch handle goes. And on that far back wall, if you can see them change to the left and the right, as the top of the camper goes up, those lift the third center wall up with it. Then getting this thing on the truck without a piece of equipment proved to be a little easier than I thought, although the first time it fell back and put a jack through the door, so I had to redo the door. Now my old Dodge has a 12-valve Cummins in it, and it got about 14 to 15 miles to the gallon before, and it got about the same afterwards. With some performance upgrade stuff and the fact that she weighs about 14,000 pounds doesn't help that fuel mileage. Now some of the things that I might have done different and I didn't think about was, if you notice, there's not a lot of room between the door and my bike. There's still about a foot with the bike on there, so that wasn't too bad. Now having a way to heat it other than a Coleman stove would have been nice, and that propane stove put out a lot of moisture, and that wasn't very helpful in such a small area. Of course a wood stove would have been nice, but this thing was so darn tight when you put it back down, it was hard to have a place to put it. Now one of the biggest problems I had with this thing and living out of it was to bring the camper down from a popped up position. You had to slide the cabinet towards the center and bring the bed down as well. I had the cabinet on heavy-duty kitchen sliders that you'd find in a drawer. Now this thing really would do best on a trailer, and that's what I ended up doing with it after a year. I built a little trailer for it, and I ended up selling it. And a guy in New Mexico bought it. He uses it, takes it on ski trips. Now one of the things I found in southeast Alaska, everything's wet, especially if you're working construction. You're always muddy and wet. It's nice to have an area to dry everything out and take off muddy clothes and rain gear and clean fish and do stuff like that. Now all in and all done, I think this would work just fine for some people, and it also work just fine if you could pop it up and leave it somewhere, but having it on the back of your truck that you commute in every day to work just doesn't quite work out right. I just need a little bit more space and have a drier environment. Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you have questions, comments, or ideas regarding topics covered in the video, or suggestions for future video topics, comment below. Now the question is, why live in such a small space? Well, for me, it's about being mobile and it being easier to uproot every 5 months or so. The second reason is financial. The number one place I can see to save some money is when it comes to paying rent. Now, some may rather not have to make that rent money, but I'd rather make that rent money and save it for property down the road. Even if I have to pay a little for a parking space, it's been a great loophole to save some money. And being able to pack up and get going within less than 30 minutes is pretty nice sometimes. Thanks again for watching, and check out a podcast called Life, The Last Frontier, where my friend Josh and I talk about living on the road in Alaska, not to mention a wide variety of other topics. Thanks again. Get out there and maybe go north and have some fun.